Good day, everyone. So we are the group 2 and we're going to tackle is all about the contemporary global governance. So before we start, our intended learning outcome is we need to identify the roles and function of the United Nations. Second, identify the challenges of global governance in the 21st centuries. And lastly, explain the relevance of the state amid globalization.
Our first topic is about political flaws. 1. The global flow of people, especially refugees and illegal immigrants, poses a direct threat to the nation state and its ability to control its borders. So, the number of persons crossing borders on a daily basis is steadily increasing. However, mobility is becoming increasingly difficult for particular groups of individuals, refugees, economic migrants. A government power is limited by its borders. People who live within a country's border must abide by its laws and pay its taxes. If they relocate or travel to another country, they must be familiar with and follow the laws of that country. Some lines divide people who live in distinct ways. Several countries have border walls, fences, or obstacles in place around the world. These are typically used to control the border, keep illegal immigrants out, and prevent smuggling. When there are disputed or ambiguous borders, other countries use obstacles. 2. The looming crisis associated with dwindling oil and water supplies threaten to lead to riots and perhaps insurrection that could lead to downfall or extant government. A debt crisis is one country can frequently thus transmit economic misery to other countries, whether in the private sector or the government. A tightening of financial circumstances, such as a rise in interest rates, a slowdown in trade and economic growth, or just a sharp drop in confidence, might cause this. This is especially true if the crisis country is large and intertwined with the global economy. This can result in significant losses for banks, both local and international, thereby jeopardizing financial system stability in both the crisis-affected countries and others. This could stifle economic growth and wreak havoc on global financial markets. 3. The inability of the nation-state to control economic flows dominated by MNCs as well as the current economic and financial crisis that is sweeping the world is also posing a profound threat to the nation-state in Eastern Europe. So, the globalization allows enterprises in less developed countries to access more and larger markets around the world. As a result, enterprises in emerging countries have more access to finance, technology, human resources, lower import costs, and broader export markets. Without globalization, the system would be closed. We wouldn't know that was going on in other countries because it was a closed system. This also means that no invention or discoveries will be shared, which can contribute to a huge downhill of economic growth in a country. 4. The environmental problems of all sorts, especially those related to global warming, are very likely to be destabilizing politically. So, diseases will become more prevalent and involved as we fail to transition agriculture from one climate to another. Food shortage will become chronic. Climate change, according to the World Bank, could push in an additional 100 million people into poverty unless urgent action is taken? Consider yourself a low-income farmer, pastoralist, or fisherman. You're almost certainly already struggling to support your family. One of the drawbacks of environmental issues is that they maybe contribute to a loss of political stability by affecting the country debt or a budget. 5. Borderless diseases, especially malaria, TB, and AIDS in Africa, pose a danger to a political structure. So, infections, diseases both new and old, can threaten a society's social, economic, and political functions. As an infection develops, governments are obliged to respond to an anticipated crisis, necessitating costly decisions based on incomplete data, loss of public and consumers' confidence, opposition to a disease surveillance investment, and a reluctance to report disease detection in a timely or transparent manner are all political consequences of significant disease outbreaks. 6. War is the most obvious global blow threatening the nation state involved, especially those on the losing side. Aside from the very real human cost of war, there are also significant economic consequences in structural destruction. A decrease in the working population, inflation, shortage, uncertainty, a rise in debt, and disruption of normal economic activities. War is a problem of development. War kills, and the ramifications of war extend far beyond battlefield deaths. Armed conflict frequently result in forced migration, long-term refuge issues, and infrastructure loss. Institutions in the social, political, and economic realms can be permanently harmed. 7. Global inequalities, especially the profound and growing north to south split, threaten to pit poor nations against rich nations. So the terms of global north and global south, or north to south divide in the global context, actually refer to a classification of countries based on socio-economic and political factors, natural resource availability, various level of health and education, the nature of a country's economy and industrial sectors, international trading policies, and access to markets, and how countries are governed are all factors that contribute to disparities.
8. Terrorism is clearly regarded as a threat by those nations against which it is waged, hence the so-called war on terrorism in the U.S. So terrorist acts have the potential to destabilize governments, weaken civil society, risk peace and security, jeopardize social and economic growth, and disproportionately harm specific populations. All of these factors have a direct impact on the enjoyment of basic human rights. War and terrorism are activities that appear to undermine and marginalize the principles that are at the heart of the human rights and the legal system that safeguards them. Human rights, however, continue to operate, albeit in a weakened position. While they cannot solve all problems, they can provide some modest protection and hope for justice.
Global problems, many of which trade protection and liberalization efforts to increase political transparency and accountability are political in nature. Trade liberalization may also affect the prices in sectors that compete for the habitat that the natural resources relies on. For example, increasing relative returns to agriculture can hasten deforestation and soil depletion, whereas a shift to less land-intensive sectors would allow resources to recover. Is Philippines a trade liberalization? Yes, because the Philippine Trade Liberalization Program began in 1981 and reduced industrial protection administered through high tariffs and import regulations. At the beginning of the century, threats such as ethnic conflicts, infectious diseases, and terrorism, as well as a new generation of global challenges including climate change, energy security, food and water scarcity, international migration flow, and new technologies are increasing, taking center stage.
The nation state. When we talk about the nation state, we are really talking about three separate things: the nation, the state, and the nation state. The nation state is a system of organization in which people with a common identity live inside a country with firm borders and a single government. That wasn't so bad, right? But what does it all mean? The nation state has a dramatic influence on the way we live our lives. It's how we identify ourselves. I'm American, I'm Russian, and I'm Tartican. Okay, that last what isn't a thing. It also determines what language we speak, what laws we follow, and what holidays we celebrate. Cinco de Mayo, Boxing Day, 4th of July, the nation-state is a system of political, geographic, and cultural organization, and it is one of the most important parts of your life that you don't think about. The nation-state is held together by its physical boundaries, its government, and the fact that the people believe. And also, we can classify the nation-state with the following. 1. Nation. Social group linked through common descent, culture, language, or territorial contiguity. 2. The national identity. A fluid and dynamic form of collective identity. Members of the community believe that they are different from other groups. 3. Nationalism is a doctrine or political movement that seeks to make the nation the basis of a political structure, especially a state. 4. State. Organizational structure outside other socio-economic hierarchies with relatively autonomous office holders. 5. Nation. State integrates sub-groups that define themselves as a nation with the organizational structure of the state.
Okay, next is the traits of the nation states. So what are traits of the nation states? Traits of the nation states are those factors affecting the development of a certain country or a nation state. It can really devastate an economy of a certain nation state. So, letter A, we have, in terms of the global economy, nation states have become little more bit actors. It refers to the borderless global economy that the nation states are unable to control. So, an example ani are illegal trades. Illegal commerce that wala nag-follow sa rules, laws na gi-implement sa World Trade Organization. So, ang illegal trades walay makuha nga tariff ang nation state or the World Trade Organization. It is really a threat since wala siya given permit or permissions from the nation state. So, definitely walay makuha nga benefits ang nation states kung illegal ang trade or illegal ang commerce. Next is letter B. The decline of the nation state is linked to technological and financial challenges as well as to accelerated integration of national economies into one single global market economy. While nation state once controlled markets it is now the markets that often control the nation states. So, ang best example na is capitalism. So, when we say capitalism, capitalism is an economic and political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by the private owners or for profit rather by the state. So, ang control ani sa market sa nation ang capitalist, those oligarchs. So, every time gusto nila og inflation, so for their own profit or their own interest, so definitely they can implement it directly kay sila may ang handle sa market sa usa ka nation. So, it is really a threat. For example, what if psychopaths ang capitalist? So, there is a big possibility nga maruin ang economy sa usa ka nation. So next are other factors threatening the autonomy of the nation states. Letter A, we have including flows of information. So in this case, these are the problem that very rampant since there are a lot of hackers who manipulate, who scattered fake information. And also we have the biased media that keep on having brainwashed the people. Biased media that spreading fake news. That's why our government sectors, especially in Philippine National Police, hired information technologies expert so that they can easily address every time there is hacker conducting espionage inside the information system. Next is letter B, illegal immigrant. It is a migration of people into a country in violation of a migration laws of a certain country without the legal right to live in that country. Example of that is OFW expired visa. In Philippines, we have immigration laws that keep an eye on illegal immigrants. We have the Philippine Immigration Law of 1940, Republic Act 562, Alien Registration Act of 1950. Next is letter D. Letter C, illegal movements. So, illegal movements are the protest. Citizen conducting protest. That's why it is a threat because citizen of a certain country have a great power when they have conducted protest. Example of it is in Pakistan, the rally of Pakistan. Citizens of Pakistan keep on complaining about the new elected prime minister since they don't want Imran Khan, the previous prime minister of Pakistan, to leave the chair, the regime, because of Imran Khan good deeds as a former Pakistan prime minister. Next is terrorist. So, terrorists indeed are threats of a nation state since they are creating violence to the people, to the citizen of certain country. Example of it is ISIS, Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, who kill people in an inhuman way. Also, we have in Philippines, we have the NPA that keep on creating dispute against the government. Next, letter F, drugs. It is the prohibited one, which is source of addiction to the people when it is being intake. Example of drugs are shabu, marijuana, cocaine that handled by big syndicate. Next is letter G, money, including laundered money and other financial instruments. So, money laundering are illegal process of making large amount of money generated by criminal activity. Next is letter H, sex trafficking, and much else. So it is also considered a threat of a nation since it it violates the social norms and the laws implemented by the government. Many of these flaws had been made possibly by the development and continual refinement of technology of all sorts. The nation state has become increasingly porous. So when we say porous, not secure or not retentive. So a nation state must have a secure, a government must be secure in handling all the bodies of government so that those traits of a nation cannot scoundrel the bodies of a country. Okay, let's continue. While this seems to be supported by a great deal of evidence, the fact it is that no nation state has ever been able to control its borders completely. Thus is not the porosity of a nation state that is new, but rather what is new in a dramatic increase in that porosity and the kinds of flows that are capable of passing through the national borders.
Next, international human rights and human rights.
International human rights. Human rights defined as the entitlement of individual to life, security, and well-being has emerged as a major global political issue. It is argued that because these human rights are universal, the nation states cannot abrogate them. As a result, a global human rights group has claimed the right to be able to have a say about what is done to people within and between illegal trafficking in humans. Sovereign state, those in such a view, human rights are a global matter and not exclusively a concern of that state. Furthermore, the implication is that the international community can and should intervene when a state violates human rights or when a violation occurs within a state border and the state does not take adequate action to deal with the violation. And also, international human rights law is the body of international law that seeks the protection of rights that are inherent to human person. Example example of human rights is we have the right to vote, the right to freedom of association, the right to a fair trial, the right to privacy, and the right to freedom of religion.
So, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, UDHR, is a declaration that serves as a global roadmap for liberty and inequality, safeguarding the rights of all people everywhere. It was the first time that countries agreed on the freedoms and rights that all people should have in order to live their lives freely, equally, and in dignity. The UDHR was adopted by the newly established United Nations on 10 December 1948 in response to the barbarous acts which outraged the conscience of mankind during the Second World War. Its adoption recognized human rights to be the foundation for freedom, justice, and peace. Then, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a landmark text. For the first time, the world had a document that declared all persons to be free and equal regardless of gender, race, creed, religion, or other traits. The 30 rights and freedoms set out in the UDHR include the right to be free from torture, the right to freedom of expression, the right to education, and the right to seek asylum. It includes civil and political rights such as the rights to life, liberty, and privacy. It also includes economic, social, and cultural rights, such as the rights to social security, health, and adequate housing.
The United Nations or UN, in spite of its myriad problem, It is a premier global organization in the realm of politics. United Nations is an intergovernmental organization whose purpose is to maintain international peace, security, deep friendly relation among nations, achieve international cooperation, center of harmonizing the actions of the nation, tied all membering countries for a strong diplomatic and strategic mutual relationship. Historically, United Nations was founded at 1945. The current incumbent president of United Nations is Abdullah Shahid, sit the chair since September 14, 2021. United Nations also have six major organs. First, we have the General Assembly, the Security Council, the Economic and Social Council, the Trusteeship Council, International Court of Justice, and the UN Secretariat. United Nations govern the World Trading Organization, the big commerce, the trading of all goods. It also governs political system and settle dispute among membering country.
Roles and function of the United Nations. It's all about the United Nations' primary goal is to maintain international peace and security. Chapter 6 of the Charter mandates the peaceful resolution of disputes through the Security Council actions, including methods such as dialogue, mediation, arbitration, and judicial judgments. The Security Council has the authority to investigate any dispute or situation to see if it is poses a threat to world peace and security. The Council may appropriate procedure or techniques of adjustment at any stage of the dispute. And if the parties fail to resolve the disagreement by peaceful ways, the council may recommend condition of settlement. 1. To maintain international peace and security, and to that end, to take effective collective measures for the prevention and removal of threats to the peace, and for the suppression of acts of aggression or other breaches of the peace, and to bring about by peaceful means and in conformity with the principle of justice and international law, adjustment or settlement of international disputes, or in situation which might lead to a breach of the peace. Second, to develop friendly relationship among nations based on respect for the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples, and to take other appropriate measures to strengthen universal peace. Third, to achieve international cooperation in solving international problems of an economic, social, cultural, or humanitarian character, and in promoting encouraging respect for human rights and for fundamental freedoms for all without distinction as to race, sex, language, or religion, and for to be a center for harmonizing the action of nations in the attainment of this common.
The United Nations for broad are 1. Military issue. The United Nations was envisioned as a major force in managing peace and security, especially in interstate relations. However, it was marginalized during the Cold War I, largely because in the Security Council, both the US and the Soviet Union could veto proposed intervention. A turning point in the military role of the UN was the 1991 authorization by the Security Council of the use force deal with Iraq's invasions to Kuwait. Throughout the 1990s, the United engaged in wide variety of action that there were not anticipated by its founders and which has been regarded previously as a province of a state. So, in relation with the Iraq invasion to Kuwait, during that time, ang function sa United Nations role kay ang US, they send forces to the Iraq to confront and and stop the invasion. So that time, during the during the war, the president of Iraq named Saddam Hussein was killed by American forces as American trying to stop the war. In fact, every time when there is military issues, mga territorial disputes, boundaries, borders, ang United Nations mo give dayon og immediate response. Well, we also include letter A, interventions in civil war in less developing countries. So, when we say civil war, it is a war between the citizen of a certain country. It could be a war between the citizen and the government. So, as United Nation give it function, United Nation will settle it, give an immediate response for serenity. Next is letter B, election and human rights monitoring. So, every time kung naay election, ang United Nation mo hatag jud na siya gihapon og response, especially sa COMELEC for the fair election, for a fair choosing of right leaders. In human rights, they've also sent investigator when there is a leak about human rights violation. Next is letter C, disarmament. Ang the best example ani was during the Iraq's invasion to Kuwait because of the the nuclear weapon of Iraq. So the US firstly condemned the Iraq because of the mass destruction. We all know the mass destruction can annihilate a country, can kill the humanity. So as United Nations function, they Iraq. So that's all. Letter D. Assumption of the state functions in Cambodia and East Timor, for example. However, the expansion of UN in these areas was tempered by failures in the 1990s in Somalia and Yugoslavia. In the military realm, it's also important to mention the fact that the UN has been actively involved in arms control and disarmament. So, involved jud na always ang United Nations sa arms controls because namangoy treaty nga gisign. Example of it is the Treaty of the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. So, this treaty entails about or against the creation of the nuclear weapon. We all know that nuclear weapon is a very great threat to humanity. Let's proceed to number 2, economic issue. Promote action that will lead to a reduction in global inequality. So, global inequality. So, United Nations already have bodies that regulates for an equal trading, equal commerce of every nation. Number 3, environmental issues, pollution, hazardous waste, which are dealt with primarily through the United Nations Environment Program. So, United Nations also give more programs about giving care of our environment. They also put sanction to those psychopath corporation who violate laws, who keep on scattering their waste which is the source of dino-plagiarized water, a polluted air, and a polluted environment. Next is the human protection. A variety of UN-sponsored human rights treaties and agreements have protected the human rights around the world. So, it is very common that just like the Philippines, war on drugs, nadya response ang United Nations about killing of people that involved in drugs. So, that's all.
Okay, next, the relevance of state amidst globalization. With globalization, the nation state faces innumerable challenges, leading to a significant loss of control over economic flows and transnational organization. Second is, although the role of the nation state has declined, it is still an important political structure. However, in the global age, the porosity of the nation state, the increasing global flows through it, should be a focal concern. The relevance of the nation state in a globalization is a complex to understand due to change of concept of globalization. While it was defined in several ways, globalization is defined as a fading of economic, social, and cultural between nation states.
Benedict Anderson's Imagine Community is an important idea in thinking about the nation states. As a result of development of print capitalism, it came to be conceived as being actively constructed socially and politically by the people who identified with the community that is presented by the nation states. Anderson's depicts a nation as a socially constructed community, imagined by the people who perceive themselves as a part of a group. The most obvious example of imagined community are the modern state wherein technology existing and keep on improving. Let's continue. This concept is extended further by examining how the nation state transcends as its geographic boundaries. When we say geographic boundaries, it is the land boundaries of every country. In the face of rapidly developing technologies and increasing immigration flows, emphasis is the placed on the reimagining of the nation state in the light of the such global flows. So, na-mention man rin ang print capitalism, so I'll give it an definition. It is a theory underlying, print capitalism is a theory underlying the concept of a nation as a group that forms an imagined community that emerges with a common language and discourses that it is generated from the use of the printing press proliferated by the capitalist market.
Changing geopolitical scenario. The world can be seen as evolving through 3 stages. So mauni siya ang tulo ka stages: bipolar, unipolar, ug finally to tripolar future in the US, EU, and China. So first, bipolar. Ang bipolar can define as a system of world order in which the majority of global economic, military, and cultural influence is held between two states. The classic case of a bipolar world, for example, of bipolar, the Cold War between the United States and Soviet Union, which dominated the second half of the 20th century. Ang unipolar is the ascendary of the US. Ang example of unipolar is since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the United States enjoys unparalleled military power. The international system is therefore unipolar. Finally, to tripolar future with the US, EU, and China. The first button, the US has re-established itself as the global policeman, using sanctions much more than its military power. The second button is that Germany is rearming and leading Europe for now aligned with US, but this may not always be the case. The third button is that China is building itself up with the global system for now, but Russia's fall confirms its need to break away.
What is global governance? Global governance is a movement toward political integration of transnational actors aimed at negotiating response to problems that affect more than one state or region. It tends to involve institutionalization. The institution of global governance, the United Nations, the International Criminal Court, the World Bank, etc., tend to have limited or demarcated power to enforce compliance. The modern question of world governance exists in the context of globalization and globalizing regimes of power politically, economically, and culturally. In response to the acceleration of interdependence on a worldwide scale, both between human societies and between humankind and the biosphere, the term global governance may also use to name the process of designating laws, rules, or regulation intended for a global scale. When we say global governance, it facilitates cooperation, resolve dispute, and alleviate collective action problem. Broadly entails making, monitoring, and enforcing law. Example of it is the ICC, World Bank, the United Nations, especially the United Nations, which play a big role in governing worldwidely. Under the United Nations, we have also OPEC, Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. It is an intergovernmental organization of oil demand supply market. Regulates the price and the amount of supply of oil. Global governance dako jud siya of playing a role in world trade, enforcing law, although sa UN dako siya rule.
So, the new forms of governance. First, governance without government identifies the possibilities for social order without government institution, bureaucracies, and representative leaders that forcefully mandate acceptable behavior within society. Governance without government does not identify a post-political society where the need to talk and discuss arising social problems does not occur, but rather a post-government society where the mechanisms for social order are embedded throughout society in the means of production, processes of gifting and exchange, educational system, and communication apparatus. Government, if it can still be labeled as such, is stripped of all authority and power, becoming a table for social discussion rather than a building an actor separate from society, dictating the present and future of society. Second, the governments by various public policy networks. Public policy generally consists of the set action plan, laws, and behaviors adopted by a government concerned with the new governance draws attention to the extent to which these actions are often performed now by agents of the state rather than directly by a state. And third, governments at the global level can be normatively mediated and moderated. This governance is no problem, especially in laws that have been enacted. Challenges of global governance in the 21st century is all about the with the acceleration of globalization dynamics dangers to the international system stability have expanded to the point that formerly limited threats are no longer contained regionally. Ethnic conflicts, infection, illnesses, climate change, food hunger, and other pressing issues are posing a growing threat to global security, stability, raising questions about the current global governance order's ability to address the problem of the 21st centuries.
International non-governmental organization. The international not-for-profit organization performing public function but not established or run by nation-states. The first modern international non-governmental organizations are traceable to the 19th century. The International Red Cross was founded in Switzerland in 1865, but they have boomed in recent years. turning point in the history of international governmental organizations occurred in 1992 when a treaty to control the emission of greenhouse gases was signed as a result of the actions of a variety of groups that not only exerted external pressure but were actually involved in the decision-making process. International treaties first headed by the International Campaign to Ban Landmines or ICBL. The treaty was signed in 1997 by 122 nations which agreed to stop selling and using landmines. An international non-governmental organization is an organization which is independent of government involvement and extend the concept of non-governmental organization. Negative sides to the growth of international non-governmental organization and civil society. Fundamentally, are special interest group and therefore they may not take into consideration wider sets of concerns and issues. In addition, they are not democratic, often keep their agendas secret, and are not accountable to anyone other than their members. Negative sides to the growth of international non-governmental organization and civil society. Fundamentally, are special interest group and therefore they may not take into consideration wider sets of concerns and issues. In addition, they are not democratic, often keep their agendas secret, and are not accountable to anyone other than their members.
Intergovernmental organizations is all about the term intergovernmental organization. IGO refers to a legal entity formed by a treaty between two or more governments to collaborate in good faith on problems of mutual concern. In the legal sense, an IGO does not exist without a treaty. International governmental organizations, IGOs, are organizations made up of more than one national government. The governments are the members, examples, United Nations, Organization of American States, North Atlantic Treaty Organizations, and lastly, World Health Organizations. Dangers to INGOs. So, it's all about INGOs are non-profit organizations that provide a variety of services in low and lower middle income nations. These organizations are international in the sense that they raise money in developed countries and then use it in other countries. They work in a range of fields including economic development, humanitarian relief, environmental protection, and human rights. INGOs will be limited to economic development and humanitarian situations for the purposes of this entry, as these are the areas where the word INGO is most commonly used.